We're in the garden, the Indigenous food garden that we were in last week with Connor, and this is not the new project. This is one of the original shelter belts planted in the 90s here when there was a whole farm planning process for the Collingwood Children's Farm. And yeah, Rachel's just talking about some really interesting issues about, I guess, following on from the work done here by Ellie Pavlou in terms of planting this out with the Wurundjeri or locally Indigenous food plants. And so, Rachel, you were just talking about making sure this shelter belt woodlot is actually used.
Yeah, one thing we've noticed, Cindy, my colleague, and I, who work mostly down here and responsible for caring for it, is that it doesn't get a lot of activation, doesn't get a lot of people here. It's at the back of the farm, it's got a gate to it, people don't really know what it is. So we need to increase this area for appropriate cultural education and just environmental education, because it's not really hugely productive in that we get a lot of revenue through from selling produce from this garden, but it is beautiful and it's very culturally appropriate. It was developed in a really thoughtful way, but we need to increase the education and engagement. So we've done things like when we've had Kid Teaching Kids Week, had workshops in here, getting kids to take cuttings and propagate, getting kids to collect seeds off the Jodinea that was in seed at that moment and sieving it, getting them to taste bower spinach or warrigal greens or saltbush, but having targeted education down here. We've also partnered with Cultivating Community and having workshops teaching teachers to teach outside. So we have we've had a fire down here, using sticks and things to teach curriculum like science and maths and everything like that, but in a more calm space. We've just put these logs up here to be like an outdoor classroom, so kids can sit along here. We've had some big trees removed, that's why the logs are there, because we had to do something with them.
So Rachel, these, this is so interesting, because really what you're saying is, and again, for students in the class, if you look at the original plan for this space, this was a shelter belt, a woodlot, and maybe some of the trees, the idea was you could actually, sorry about the light there, you could actually fell them for timber one day. Yeah. Maybe that's still possible, but I guess what you're saying is this is really becoming much more of a garden, right?
Yes, yeah. And also because of the trees, and it's incredibly dry down here, even when we've had 10 to 15 mil of rain, nothing really gets through the canopy.
Through the canopy, right.
So traditionally it was hand watered. We, like I said, don't have many resources, staff hours, all of that here. So Cindy, my colleagues, put irrigation in. Since we've done that, we've noticed the growth and productivity is like doubled. And so it's about the garden design, what's it used for now, what was it intended to use for, how can we activate the space and engage with more people. A lot of people are interested in Indigenous food plants and native plants now, and mostly that's adults, but it's also about teaching the appropriate cultural history and maybe reteaching a lot of that adult group. So whenever we get our corporate volunteers come through here, so we bring them down to the Indigenous garden, Cindy and myself, when we're allocated to the corporate volunteers, so maybe 10 people that work in the CBD at an advertising agency or something. They've got their volunteer days they have to do it. We bring them here and we try and re-educate them about a more informed cultural history of Indigenous Australians in this area versus what they were taught in kind of the Anglo curriculum of the
mainstream educational system.
Yeah, mainstream educational system.
Really interesting. And I guess, sorry, just following on from the idea that it's an activated space now, is that, and we're just going to go down in a minute and look at some other woodlots, which you could argue very loosely are wildlife corridors, or at least a habitat. I guess a compromise when you're making decisions about these kind of, and I have to say very 1990s land care style plantings, having been involved with a lot myself, is that with these wattles here, which I think are acacia dealbata or acacia, which are relatively long-lived for acacias, but you can see there's a few have got sick and have died, and that's very normal for acacias. They're kind of pioneering trees. The point is, in a wildlife corridor or a habitat planting, dead and dying trees are fine. They collapse, they fall, they create habitat. But again,
here it's a management issue.
Right.
It's a maintenance issue. They haven't been managed properly, and then they fall over and they crush things, or they fall over, they create mess, or they create stuff we've got to deal with when usually you'd leave it to decay and become habitat. But in an activated space, it's, you know,
yeah, very interesting.
Tree management is a whole another kettle of fish.
All right, let's wander down the Zoras.